Nadia Matar is the co-founder and co-chairwoman of the Sovereignty Movement. And I'm Maayan Hoffman, executive editor of ILTV, and I welcome you back to the ILTV News Podcast. And welcome to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Maayan. Thank you for having us and the Sovereignty Movement, the Sovereignty Plan. And I represent here not only myself, but my co-chair, Judith Katsaver, who really is the one who thought about the need to promote a plan for the right wing, the national camps. For so many years, we've said no to a Palestinian state, don't cave into the terrorists, don't do this, don't do that. And Yehudit in 2011 said, so what is our yes? You can't go around life saying, no, I'm not going to be a dentist, I'm not going to be a teacher, I'm not going to be this. So what are we? What do we represent? And here we are.
So your movement, just to help explain to people, wants to have full sovereignty over Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley. Can you explain practically what that looks like on the ground?
So in 1967, when we were attacked on all fronts and the Arab states wanted to destroy us, a miracle happened and we returned, conquered, liberated Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, Golan. I have no problem with the word conquer. When somebody takes something that's mine, I'll reconquer it. And the government of Israel did not apply its sovereignty, left the area in a limbo. So practically, applying sovereignty would mean that the same civil laws that apply in Tel Aviv, Ra'anana, and Jerusalem would apply in Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley. It means an end to the military governance that has been there since 1967 over Israeli citizens. We would finally, we who live there, because I have the privilege of being a mitnachel in Hebrew, which is badly translated as a settler in English, but it's really the inheritors of the land. We would not anymore be under a separate legal status, but we will have full Israeli rights like everybody else in this country. We have the same obligations, but we don't have the same rights. But of course, it means also an end to Oslo, an end to the Palestinian Authority. We'll talk about that maybe a little later. But the most important thing of full Israeli sovereignty is not the legal and administrative changes. It is the moral and strategic message we are passing on. It is Israel's declaration to the world and to itself. This is our heartland. This land belongs to us. It doesn't belong to anybody else, because as long as there's no sovereignty, we are basically passing on a message of ambiguity, which is dangerous because you fuel false hopes by the Arabs and the international community that this land may eventually be given away or turned into a Palestinian state. Therefore, when you apply sovereignty, you're telling the world once and for all, we put an end to that illusion. This entire land, from the river to the sea, belongs to the Jewish people. And let us be clear, Israel has every right, biblically, morally, historically, and under international law, to apply sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. The San Remo Revolution, I call it, because it's a revolution, yes, resolution of 1920, the League of Nations mandate, and later, of course, Article 80 of the UN Charter, all recognize the right of the Jewish people to settle and govern this land, not to talk, of course, about the Bible. And so the last sentence, sovereignty is not an expansion, it's the fulfillment of the rights of the Jewish people over its God-given biblical heartland.
So first of all, what is the difference between annexation and sovereignty? Because a lot of times you hear about annexing, the same thing we're talking about applying sovereignty over.
Applying sovereignty is basically implementing what we could have done already in 1967, and it's just a vote in the Knesset. Annexing is taking over land that belonged to somebody else, and that's not the case in Judea and Samaria. So the term annexation is wrong. It's application of Israeli sovereignty.
Now, you say it doesn't belong to somebody else, but there are close to 3 million Palestinians living in this territory. You know, what we're calling Judea and Samaria, what is popularly known as the West Bank in Western media for sure, meaning west of the West Bank of the Jordan River. In that territory, we don't want to get into too many details. People don't understand it, but there's Area A, Area B, and Area C. Area C is the area now where the Jewish community lives predominantly. I know there's some land creeps and other things. We can talk about it. Area A, completely run by the Palestinian Authority, and Area B, Palestinian Authority with some access from the Israeli side or some governance by the Israeli side. So what happens to these 2.8 million Palestinians if we enact sovereignty?
Maayan, first of all, don't say 2.8 million because that's not correct.
Well, how many?
Unless you are repeating the lies spread by the Statistical Bureau of the Palestinian Authority. Of course, they want to say 2.8. Sometimes they say 3.5. And thank God we have researchers, whether it's Joram Ettinger, whether it's Dr. Mike Weiss and others who check the facts. And the Palestinian Authority is lying with at least 1 million people. Nobody dies. People who leave, they're still there.
That's amazing. No one dies.
So exactly.
We should all want to live there.
So there's, according to, but there's still, let's face it, there's still 1.5 to 1.8 million Arabs who live in Judea and Samaria. I do not accept anymore the A, B, and C because I want to abolish the Oslo terminology. And therefore, your question is a very important one. What is going to happen? I will tell you, there's what we thought before October 7th and after October 7th. After October 7th, we discovered, according to all the polls, that close to 80% of the Arabs of Judea and Samaria were in favor of the massacre, of the October 7 massacre.
No, Nadia, that number has gone down. That was 80%, I believe, immediately following the massacre.
Right,
And
so
today
that's
it's
enough.
closer to 60%.
Because they see that what happened to Gaza. But I stick to the 80% because that's when their real feelings came about and they expressed they identified with what happened on October 7th.
And that's by a poll that was conducted in Ramallah.
Okay.
But I'm saying Ramallah of their own people, so it's
Yeah,
about
we
it's
don't
a very
have to
viable.
defend that. Ramallah represents
well, that's what I'm saying. I think it's very important to say that because it's not an Israeli poll of Palestinians. This is actually a Palestinian poll of Palestinians.
Absolutely.
So that would make the poll even more accurate.
So if in the past there were voices, also by us in the sovereignty movement, open to the idea of offering citizenship or even permanent residency to this population, today, after October 7th and after those polls, the reality demands a different approach. No sovereign nation can be expected to extend any political or any rights to a population that wants to kill us and destroy us. So it's not called discrimination, it's called self-preservation. So what we think should be done after we apply Israeli sovereignty is anybody who rejects the Jewish legitimacy should be helped to relocate according to President Donald Trump's plan. Relocation not only for the Arabs in Gaza, but also for those in Judea and Samaria who belong to the 80% who were in favor of the massacre.
Well, I think that Donald Trump's plan is to allow relocation.
We will allow them with international, generous international help, assistance, etc. We will help them. At the same time, we recognize that not all the Arabs were in favor of the massacre. That minority, around 80%, 20%, who did not support the October 7 massacre, we are willing to offer them a path to permanent residency, not citizenship. Again, because there's only one condition. They have to accept the fact that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. It always will have a Jewish majority, and it will have a non-Jewish minority as long as it doesn't use our democratic tools to overturn our Jewish state, nor does it use any tools to implement any national aspirations, which we will not allow. But as long as they stay a minority that respects Israel as the one and only Jewish state in the entire world, we will consider giving them permanent residency if they act according to what they
don't want to kill us, basically.
Yes. If they want to what?
If they don't want to kill us.
If they don't want to kill us,
Right.
exactly. And we don't have to be ashamed to talk
I
about
think
that.
that's very fair to say. I mean, we don't need to have people living in our midst that want to murder us. I mean,
Absolutely.
That's in a non-Jewish state. If there were criminals that wanted to kill you, you would block them up or you would deport them. So I mean, you have argued though that you cannot even agree in theory to a Palestinian state because you say that it is dangerous. I think for those of us who witnessed October 7th, people who actually live here, we can understand that. We don't need to ask you, why would you think that a Palestinian state is dangerous? We, unfortunately and very heavily, have seen our loved ones be murdered, raped, kidnapped, taken hostage in this country. But the rest of the world, diplomatically, doesn't seem to believe sometimes even what went on in this country on October 7th. And the truth of the matter is that in the end of the day, diplomacy is often built on compromises, even the most dangerous of compromises. So are there any scenarios in your mind where that could shift, where a Palestinian state may be an option?
Well, I would promote it in France. No, this was just a joke. France is turning into an Arab country. Now, seriously. I cannot agree, and we cannot agree, to the very idea of the creation of a Palestinian state, even in theory, with many, many conditions, because then you give legitimacy and you recognize the idea of a Palestinian people that has so-called rights on our land. And the moment you agree, even in theory, to a Palestinian state, even if it's demilitarized or all the things that they're telling us now, don't worry, it's going to be okay, you grant legitimacy to a claim that has no historical or legal basis, because those people who call themselves Palestinians, the Arabs of Eretz Israel, they're not an indigenous nation with ancestral ties to this land. I have to show you what I show many people. It's a little bit provocative, but I show it because sometimes it gets more in the head of people. I always say the battle is between two books. Between our Bible, which is full about our right to this land, that God gave us this land. Even people who are not religious. Ben Gurion was not very religious, but he said the Bible is our mandate to this land. This is the mandate to our land, and it's the battle between two books. Second book, it's a little bit of a provocation. It's our friend Asaf Vol who did it, a history of the Palestinian people from ancient times to modern era, and 100 white pages. There is no history. So many people laugh about it. I also used to laugh about it, but I don't laugh anymore, because the world, who does the world believe? When I speak to groups, I say to them, they believe this lie. Right. Why? Because they meet Arabs who say it's all ours, the Jews have stolen our land, etc., which is a lie. But then they meet Jews who say, well, for peace, we're willing to compromise, we're willing to divide our capital, we're even willing to uproot our brothers. So who will the world believe? The time has come to not agree to any Palestinian state, because the idea of a Palestinian state is basically came into the idea of a Palestinian people, the fake Palestinian people, came into being in order to destroy Jewish sovereignty over its land. And secondly, agreeing to a theoretical Palestinian state not only undermines our right to the land, but if somebody like a prime minister in Israel agrees, as we say, winks and says, right, I'll agree, ke'ilu, as we say in Hebrew, only in theory, it sets a precedent.
Right.
Because future leaders in Israel and abroad will say, hey, he agreed in theory, so let's continue. Right. So we cannot agree, not in theory and certainly not in practice, a Palestinian state. Anybody who promotes a Palestinian state promotes the destruction of Israel as a Jewish state. This has to be understood.
Now, Nadia, you have said over and over that the land of Israel is ours, is the Jewish people's land. And as you just showed the Bible, the Torah, it is throughout the Torah that this land was given by God to the Jewish people for those who believe faithfully in that. But of course, there are many Jews, Christians, and others who would disagree with that today and say, okay, it's in the Bible, but now we're talking about, territory and maybe potentially exercising sovereignty over all of Judea, Samaria, Gaza, the Jordan Valley would be a diplomatic nightmare, and actually potentially very dangerous, and maybe even its own existential threat. And there would be so much backlash to a decision like that. So what do you say to those people?
That first of all, I understand their concerns. And we all agree that the Torah gave us this land, and many people have to understand it's not only a spiritual inheritance, but it's a real inheritance, and we have to act upon it. And many people especially talk about what you just mentioned with the Saudi Arabia. They say, well, maybe we should have peace with Saudi Arabia, and therefore you should accept a Palestinian state, etc. And it's very important to discuss that, because this is being discussed right now. So I want to quote what Energy Minister Eli Cohen said. He said it so simply: if I have to choose between peace with Saudi Arabia or sovereignty, I choose sovereignty. And we thank him for saying the thing so clearly. It appears in our Sovereignty Journal also. He's basically saying, I'm not rejecting peace, but I give priority to our national rights and long-term security, because sovereignty is something permanent. It's a permanent reality. Peace agreements, unfortunately, they're temporary, they're unreliable. Do I have to remind the so-called Munich agreements in 1938, or Israel's Munich agreements of 1993, the Oslo agreements, when there was such a fanfare, there was such incredible euphoria that there's going to be peace, and we know what happened. And therefore, number one, if I have to choose between sovereignty and a peace agreement with any Arab country, we'll choose sovereignty. But now I want to ask a question. Why do we have to choose? Why does it have to be or? Why is Israel always asked to make concessions for something? Haven't we made enough concessions over the years? And I want to challenge that idea. Why does peace with Saudi Arabia why is it mutually exclusive with sovereignty? We want to have both. And the Arab world respects people who are strong. The Arab world and the entire world respects people who are steadfast and can say to the world, this is my land, you want peace with me? Go for it, but I will have sovereignty. So that's my answer.
Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it was reported by Israel Hayom, was speaking on Sunday in one of the closed-door Knesset meetings, and he insinuated that Israel could potentially enact sovereignty over around 30% of the territory, probably similar to the deal of the century, which President Trump presented during his first term. He also stepped away from it, but it had about 70% of the land going eventually to some kind of demilitarized Palestinian state, another 30%. And we don't know what Netanyahu was referring to, but probably something like that. And he said that could happen relatively soon. So why isn't that enough? I mean, what would we be losing if we said, okay, look, we'll enact sovereignty right now over 30%.
You're using the word annex. So we will apply sovereignty.
Enact. I'm using the word enact.
Enact, excuse me. I didn't hear you.
Yes,
okay.
my English Kansas accent here. Enact sovereignty, or if we would move forward with sovereignty over a portion of the land, would that be a problem? Why do we have to take it all right now?
The axioma has to be that there has to be Israeli sovereignty over all of Judea and Samaria, but we are not categorically opposed to it being in stages on one condition, that it does not give way or it doesn't allow the creation of a Palestinian state. That is why we opposed the deal of the century, and we're very, very proud that we opposed the deal of the century, and we lost some good friends who tried to convince us, you're getting 30% with the deal of the century. And we said, yes, but did you read the rest of the text where it speaks more than once, dozens of times, about 70% for a Palestinian state? Oh, but it will be demilitarized. That's not acceptable. So if it's 30% with a possibility of creating a Palestinian state, no way. But if it's stages with the understanding that there will never be a Palestinian state and that it will not be 30% on A, B, or C, but that it will be applied on the maximum territory possible. Some people even phrase it in an interesting way. Basically applying sovereignty to all areas except the dense urban Arab centers.
Meaning like you wouldn't go to Nablus, but you would go to
we would have on everything. Because also I don't want to talk anymore about A, B, and C.
Okay.
Not only Area C is ours. Everything is ours. Now in Area A and B, you have Arab villages and Arab cities. So people say we're not ready yet to do it tomorrow. But tomorrow we could apply sovereignty over everything, whether it's Greater Jerusalem, all of Shomron, all of Gush Etzion. Greater Jerusalem, by the way, is a separate issue. Has to become a big metropolitan. How do you say that in English? A metropolitan. Metropolis. Why is Jerusalem so small? That is part of the sovereignty plan. Has to be to make Jerusalem greater, including Ma'ale Adumim, including Gush Etzion, including even Binyamin. So if the stage doesn't go according to Oslo, and if we understand that there is no Palestinian state, and if we understand that the application of sovereignty in the end will be over everything, we're willing to accept the idea of applying sovereignty over everything except the dense urban Arab population, which we will deal with afterwards, which we also have to control, and we have to make sure that there's no more Palestinian Authority. But that can go in two stages. Again, the main plan is Israeli sovereignty from the river to the sea.
Now, you are often backed, you meaning the sovereignty movement, by evangelical Christians who also believe in the Bible and believe that the biblical heartland, as they like to call it, belongs to the Jews. There's many, many references inside the Jewish text. Jeremiah is one that first comes to mind about the Jews living and blossoming, in the territory that is today Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley, I'm assuming. Gaza also, by the way, is in the Bible. 100% belongs to the Jews in the original biblical map. But there is some debate there among the evangelicals, and I've in many, many years of interviewing them, especially in the previous peace agreement, the Abraham Accords in 2020, when the question was, well, did the Christians trade peace for sovereignty because they backed the peace plan and pushing off sovereignty when it seemed at the moment that we were actually going to potentially enact sovereignty before that Abraham Accords happened. So one of the things that they would regularly say was that Christians understand that that land belongs to the Jews 100%, but they believe that that is for a messianic era, or for a biblical time that may be in the future, and that what is most important to Israel today is what they pray for every day, which is peace for Jerusalem. Tell me, what is your take on this, and especially now with somebody like Ambassador Mike Huckabee here on the ground, who has been very vocal about the land belonging to the Jews?
So first of all, I believe that President Donald Trump's base, they value moral clarity, they value their religious heritage and strategic strength. And their support is very important, and I think we will have their support. But I want to emphasize, Israeli sovereignty has to be done and implemented by Israel, by the Israeli government, by the Jewish people. And the message we have of all of President Donald Trump's supporters is whatever Israel decides to do, we will respect. And that is what we have to reach. The Israeli government has to do this because the majority of the Jewish people want it, because the majority of the Knesset already voted against the Palestinian state. Over the Jordan Valley, there is no debate at all. Even the opposition is completely in favor of Israeli sovereignty over the Jordan Valley.
Right, well, very few Palestinians or Arabs live there.
Exactly. It's great that we have support of the base of President Donald Trump, but in the end, we have to do it with or without support. Mm-hmm. But when Israel does things with support, with strength, and with believing in the justice of our cause, we will have the support of all those who believe in the survival of Western civilization, because the real battle here is not about this or that settlement or community in Judea and Samaria. The battle here is much bigger than that. And I brought with me, if you let me, because that is the main message. We have here a flag that the Palestinian Authority flew over in Bethlehem, and it says in Arabic here, Yom es-Sabat itbah el-Yehud, Yom Wahad itbah el-Nazari. On Saturdays we will murder the Jews, and on Sundays we will murder the Christians. The battle here for sovereignty is much more than just for Judea and Samaria. The battle here is for the survival of Western civilization. I want to quote you what Yoram Ettinger wrote in his latest article today. It's 2 sentences, if you allow. He says, while the U.S. considers agreements with the Ayatollah regime and its proxies, Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, a step toward reconciliation and peaceful coexistence, the Ayatollah regime considers negotiation as a step towards the realization of its ideology, a global domination of all walks of life by Shia Islam, headed by Shia clerics. And why some policymakers tend to take history, ideology, and religion lightly, assuming that money talks, the Ayatollah regime, and I include in that also the PA and all of them, is determined that ideology walks. Their ideology transcends financial and diplomatic accords and benefits. Israel must apply its sovereignty because it has to be strong. It has to be. It has to implement our right to this land, not only for the survival of Israel, but for the survival of the entire Western civilization. Because if we, God forbid, show weakness and we allow a Palestinian state, and God forbid Israel is harmed, next will be Europe turning into Eurabia, and then America and Australia. This is the battle that we are. So anybody who is still promoting a Palestinian state is on the wrong side of history. We are on the right side of history, and we have to apply sovereignty today, and we can do it. Yes, there's challenges. I don't live, we are an ideological movement, Maayan, but our feet are on the ground. We are not crazy. We know, but it's possible. The crazy messianic idea was the Oslo agreements, to give Yasser Arafat, the murderer, weapons and parts of our homeland, and believing that he will make peace with us. That was a messianic, insane idea. It was like giving Hitler in the Munich agreements. We can't make those mistakes anymore. So we are the realistic people. Those who dream about peace with the Ayatollah, they are the dangerous people. And therefore, the message is very clear. We have to apply sovereignty. It is not a crazy idea. It is a realistic idea, and it has to be done for the good of Israel, for the good of the Western civilization, for the entire world, and that's our message.
And with that message, we're going to have to wrap up. So Nadia Matar, co-founder and co-chairwoman of the Sovereignty Movement, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you to you and to ILTV.